The black pregnant woman raised her gloved hand high above the crowd, her voice cutting through the dusty air of Millbrook's town square like a blade through silence. $500 for the cowboy and his boy. The auctioneer's gavel trembled in Ezra Polk's weathered grip. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the October chill. 7 months heavy with child, Magnolia Washington stood among hostile faces that turned toward her like sunflowers toward a dark sun. Her emerald dress spoke of wealth that shouldn't exist. Her presence defied every rule this Texas town held sacred. Jeremiah McCready's hands tightened on his son's shoulders. 8-year-old Timothy clutched his carved wooden horse against his chest, the toy's painted mane worn smooth by anxious fingers. The platform beneath their feet felt like a grave they'd dug themselves. Debt had a way of burying a man alive. The crowd's murmur rose like wind before a storm. Sheriff Coleman's hand drifted to his gun belt, fingers tapping against leather in a rhythm that matched his racing pulse. Mayor Cornelius Blackwood stepped forward, his silk vest straining against his growing belly. "Now hold on there, Miss Washington. Perhaps you misunderstood the nature of this proceeding." Maggie's dark eyes found his across the sea of pale faces. Her voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I understand perfectly, Mayor. $500 for their contracts." Polk's voice cracked when he called for other bidders. Silence stretched like a rope about to snap. The hammer fell with the weight of thunder. Timothy's whisper cut deeper than any scream. "Papa, are we slaves now?" Jeb's throat closed around words that wouldn't come. His wife Sarah had died in flames 6 months ago, taking their dreams with her. Medical bills and lost livestock had carved hollows in his cheeks and shadows under his eyes. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. Maggie approached the platform with measured steps. Her pregnancy made her movements careful, deliberate. She reached into her beaded purse and withdrew the contracts Polk handed down with shaking fingers. The paper tore clean down the middle. "You're free." Jeb's legs nearly buckled. Timothy stared at the scattered pieces floating on the autumn breeze like dying leaves. "I don't understand." Maggie knelt before Timothy despite her condition. Her voice gentled to something that might have been a lullaby. "No, child. You're family now." The crowd erupted. Voices rose in anger and confusion, a chorus of discord that made horses stamp and pull at their hitching posts. Dr. Eleanor Hartwell watched from her clinic window, her medical bag clutched tight in her fists. She'd seen this moment coming like a storm on the horizon. Blackwood's face reddened to match his thinning hair. "This won't stand. There are proprieties. Expectations." Maggie rose with the grace of a woman who'd learned to carry herself like royalty in a world that wanted to crown her with thorns. Her gaze swept the crowd, taking measure of every face, cataloging allies and enemies with the precision of a general, surveying a battlefield. "My carriage is waiting." She turned toward the gleaming black coach that sat at the square's edge like a raven among sparrows. Jeb lifted Timothy down from the platform, his son's weight familiar in his arms. The boy had grown too thin since Sarah's death, too quiet. The crowd parted reluctantly. Women pulled their skirts aside as if fear were contagious. Men removed their hats but kept their eyes hard. Children peered from behind their mothers' aprons, sensing something momentous without understanding its shape. Maggie's driver, an elderly black man with silver threading his beard, helped her into the coach with practiced care. Jeb hesitated at the carriage door, Timothy still in his arms. "Why?" The question hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Maggie's hand rested on her rounded belly, fingers tracing patterns only she could see. "Because someone should have saved me once." The carriage wheels turned with the sound of grinding stone. Millbrook's main street stretched before them, lined with businesses that would soon close their doors rather than serve the woman who'd just shattered their understanding of how the world worked. Timothy pressed his face to the window, watching his old life shrink behind them. The wooden horse remained clutched in his small fists, a talisman against an uncertain future. "Miss Maggie, where are we going?" Her smile held depths that spoke of pain transformed into purpose. Home. The word carried weight that settled in Jeb's chest like a stone thrown into still water. Behind them, Millbrook buzzed with the kind of talk that births legends and funeral pyres in equal measure. Ahead lay Magnolia Ranch, where answers waited like seeds buried in fertile ground. The autumn sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, casting long shadows that reached toward tomorrow. Magnolia Ranch sprawled across the horizon like a promise carved from Texas dirt. The main house rose 3 stories high, white columns catching the dying light. Jeb had expected servants' quarters behind the kitchen. Instead, Maggie led them through carved oak doors into rooms that smelled of beeswax and lavender. Timothy's bedroom held more books than the boy had ever seen. A rocking horse stood by the window, its leather saddle worn smooth by other children's dreams. Toys filled a cedar chest that had been waiting for small hands to discover its treasures. Jeb's room adjoined his son's through a connecting door. Clean sheets stretched tight across a 4-poster bed. Fresh clothes hung in the wardrobe, sized to fit a man who'd grown lean from worry and sparse meals. "I didn't buy you to own you." Maggie stood in the doorway, her hand pressed against the small of her back. Pregnancy carved shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and dreams deferred. "I bought you to give you choice." Pride burned in Jeb's throat. He'd been raised to work for his keep, to earn his place in the world through sweat and calloused hands. Charity tasted bitter as medicine. "I'll earn our way. Whatever needs doing." Her nod held understanding that reached deeper than words. She'd worn pride once, too, before life taught her its true weight. Dawn brought the sound of cattle lowing in distress. Jeb found Maggie in the barn, kneeling beside a heifer whose labor had turned difficult. Sweat beaded her forehead despite the morning chill. Her pregnancy made bending painful, each movement deliberate. Breech birth. Jeb rolled his sleeves without being asked. His hands knew the language of birth and death, the delicate balance between intervention and patience. Together they worked, her knowledge guiding his strength. The calf slipped into the world slick and steaming. Its mother licked the small body with desperate devotion, instinct overriding exhaustion. Maggie's breathing steadied as she watched new life take its first trembling steps. "You know cattle?" Her observation carried no surprise, only recognition of a kindred spirit. Jeb wiped his hands on clean straw, studying the woman who'd paid $500 for strangers. "My daddy raised beef in Missouri, before the war changed everything." She nodded toward the fields where her herd grazed like dark spots against endless grass. "Land's been good to me. Cattle know honest work when they see it." Timothy appeared in the barn doorway, drawn by sounds of morning activity. His wooden horse dangled from one hand while he rubbed sleep from his eyes with the other. The new calf captured his attention completely. "Can I pet him?" Maggie's smile transformed her face from beautiful to radiant. She guided Timothy's small hand along the calf's neck, teaching him the gentle pressure that calmed frightened animals. "Easy now. He's still learning about the world." The boy's laugh bubbled up from some deep well that hadn't been tapped since his mother's death. Jeb's chest tightened, watching his son's face light with wonder. When had Timothy last laughed without shadows chasing the sound? Days fell into rhythm. Jeb mended fences and gentled horses while Timothy learned letters from books that challenged minds twice his age. Maggie moved through tasks with quiet efficiency, her ranch running smooth as clockwork despite her advancing pregnancy. Evenings found them on the wide porch, watching stars emerge from purple sky. Timothy would lean against Maggie's chair while she read stories that painted pictures with words. Jeb carved new toys for the boy, his knife finding familiar grooves in seasoned wood. "Miss Maggie, Mama, why do you have so many books?" The endearment slipped from Timothy's lips, natural as breathing. Maggie's hand stilled on the page, her eyes finding some distant horizon only she could see. "Knowledge is the one thing they can't take from you." Her voice carried weight that settled in the evening air like dust after rain. Jeb wondered who they were, what they had tried to steal from this woman who gave so freely to others. The locked room haunted Timothy's curiosity. It sat at the end of the upstairs hall, its door painted the same white as all the others, but somehow different. Final. The boy would pause there during his explorations, hand raised to knock before some instinct warned him away. Maggie never mentioned the room, never explained why one door remained closed in a house that welcomed strangers. But sometimes Jeb caught her staring down that hallway, her face carved from grief he couldn't name. Town visits brought whispers that followed them through Millbrook's dusty streets. Women gathered their skirts closer when Maggie passed. Men touched their hat brims but kept their greetings short. Only Dr. Eleanor Hartwell offered genuine welcome, her medical bag always ready for consultations about Maggie's pregnancy. Dangerous talk making rounds. The doctor's warning came disguised as small talk while she checked Maggie's condition. Her hands were steady on her stethoscope, but her eyes held worry. Mayor's been asking questions about your property, your past. Maggie's silence stretched like rope under tension. She adjusted her dress with movements that revealed nothing of the storm building behind her calm exterior. Anonymous notes began appearing, tucked under the ranch gate, slipped beneath the front door. The words varied, but the message remained constant. She didn't belong. Her presence upset the natural order of things. Jeb found the latest threat crumpled in Maggie's fist during morning chores. Her jaw was set in lines that spoke of battles fought long before he'd entered her life. "Let me handle this." Her head shake was barely perceptible, but absolute in its finality. Some fights can't be won with fists. Timothy fell ill on a Tuesday that dawned gray and cold. Fever painted his cheeks crimson while chills shook his small frame. He called for his mama in delirium, the word a knife that twisted in Jeb's chest. Maggie became a sentinel at the boy's bedside. She bathed his face with cool cloths and spooned broth between his cracked lips. Her pregnancy made the vigil harder, but she refused offers to spell her. When Timothy's fever finally broke near dawn, he opened eyes clear as creek water and whispered words that changed everything. "Miss Maggie, Mama, I dreamed about the soldier in the picture." Maggie's face went white as winter sky. Her hand trembled against the boy's forehead, feeling for temperature that had nothing to do with sickness. "What picture, child?" But Timothy had slipped back into healing sleep, leaving questions that hung in the morning air like smoke from a dying fire. Jeb met Maggie's eyes across his son's bed and saw secrets there deep enough to drown in. The locked room held answers she wasn't ready to give. But time was a river that only flowed one direction, carrying truth toward light whether the bearer was prepared or not. Timothy's curiosity finally overcame his respect for boundaries. The locked door yielded to his persistent fingers on a Thursday when autumn wind howled through the eaves. Inside, maps covered every wall, underground railroad routes traced in careful ink, letters bearing official seals scattered across a mahogany desk. The daguerreotype stopped his breath. Maggie stood beside a man in Union blue, both wearing wedding rings that caught the photographer's light. Her smile held joy Timothy had never seen on her face. The soldier's hand rested protective on her shoulder, claiming her as his own before God and lens. Footsteps in the hallway sent panic through Timothy's small frame. He clutched the photograph against his chest, eyes wide with the weight of discovery. Jeb appeared in the doorway, his face cycling through confusion, understanding, and something deeper than surprise. "Son." The word carried no anger, only recognition that secrets had their own season for blooming. Timothy held out the photograph with trembling fingers. "Is this why she saved us?" Jeb studied the image that explained everything and nothing. The man's face held kindness that death had preserved like flowers pressed between pages. Maggie's wedding dress spoke of love that transcended the boundaries their world demanded. "We need to put things back." But Maggie's voice from the hallway made replacement impossible. Her footsteps approached with the steady rhythm of someone walking toward judgment. She appeared in the doorway, her pregnancy making her movements careful, deliberate. Her eyes found the photograph in Jeb's hands. Color drained from her face until she resembled the ghost she'd tried to bury in this sealed room. His name was Henry. The words fell into silence, heavy as stones dropped in still water. Timothy's gaze moved between the adults, sensing currents too deep for his understanding. Colonel Henry Washington died at Gettysburg trying to make this country live up to its promises. Maggie moved to the desk where letters lay scattered like fallen leaves. Her fingers traced addresses written in careful script, communications with abolitionists, whose names appeared in history books. His family disowned me after the funeral, said a field hand had no claim on Washington blood. Jeb's hands tightened on the photograph. The pieces of Maggie's wealth, her knowledge, her careful isolation began forming a picture clear as morning sky. But you were legally married. Her nod carried weight that spoke of battles fought in courtrooms and drawing rooms where her presence challenged every assumption about race and class. Legal doesn't mean accepted. His inheritance became mine through law, but his family never stopped trying to reclaim what they saw as stolen property. Thunder rolled across the Texas sky, pressing against windows that shook in their frames. The storm outside mirrored the tempest building in Millbrook, where Mayor Blackwood's investigation had finally borne poisonous fruit. The Washington family of Virginia arrived on Friday's train, their traveling clothes dusty but their purpose sharp as polished steel. Reginald Washington carried himself with the entitled bearing of old money and older prejudices. His lawyer, Silas Crane, clutched a leather satchel that promised legal warfare. Town buzzed with their presence. Hotel rooms filled with whispered conferences. Documents emerged that questioned Maggie's marriage, her inheritance, her right to exist in the space she'd carved from hostile ground. Dr. Hartwell brought warning wrapped in a social call. Her medical bag provided cover for intelligence gathering. Her position as the town's only female physician, granting access to conversations men thought private. They're claiming racial laws invalidated your marriage, say your child will be illegitimate, void your inheritance completely. Maggie's hand rested on her rounded belly, protecting life that hadn't asked to be born into a world that would question its right to exist. Her face showed no surprise, only the weary recognition of someone who'd fought this battle before. I've been expecting them. The town split along lines deeper than geography. Families Maggie had quietly helped through lean times found themselves caught between gratitude and fear. The Irish immigrants whose children she'd taught to read wrestled with loyalty to someone who'd shown them kindness. Former Confederate soldiers whose pride she'd helped salvage through honest work struggled with defending a woman the law said shouldn't exist. Jeb faced his own crossroads. Safety lay in silence, in protecting Timothy from the storm gathering around Magnolia Ranch. But love demanded something harder than silence. It demanded truth spoken in public spaces where consequences waited like wolves in winter woods. Sunday's church service became a battlefield disguised as worship. Reverend Morrison's sermon about Christian charity fell on ears already deafened by fear and self-interest. Maggie sat in her usual pew, spine straight as a sword, while whispers buzzed around her presence. The Washington delegation occupied the front row, their expensive clothes and northern accents marking them as foreign as their claims to righteousness. Reginald's eyes never left Maggie's face, measuring her strength against his determination to reclaim what he saw as family property. After service, confrontation bloomed inevitable as desert flowers after rain. The church steps became a courtroom where lawyers spoke in measured tones about legal precedents and moral obligations. Mrs. Washington's marriage violated Texas statutes governing racial mixing. Any union so contracted is null and void, making her claims to the Washington estate fraudulent. Crane's words fell into morning air thick with possibility and dread. The congregation lingered, sensing history being written in real time. Children pressed close to their parents, absorbing tension they couldn't name. Maggie rose from where she'd been sitting on the church steps, her pregnancy making the movement deliberate, graceful despite its difficulty. When she spoke, her voice carried across the gathered crowd, clear as church bells. I have documents proving the validity of my marriage, witnesses who attended the ceremony, legal standing that's been tested in courts and found sound. But Reginald Washington's smile held the cold certainty of someone accustomed to having his way through money and influence. Documents can be questioned. Witnesses can be discredited. Courts can be convinced to see reason. The threat hung in autumn air, while Millbrook's citizens wrestled with their consciences. Some had profited from Maggie's generosity. Others feared the consequences of supporting someone their world insisted didn't belong. Jeb felt Timothy's small hand slip into his. His son's trust demanded protection, but protecting Timothy might mean abandoning the woman who'd shown them both what grace looked like when clothed in human form. The choice stretched before him, stark as winter branches against gray sky. Silence promised safety. Speaking meant risking everything on the chance that truth might triumph over tradition. Wind stirred dust around the church steps, carrying the scent of change that would transform Millbrook, whether its people were ready or not. The town meeting packed Millbrook's community hall until bodies pressed against walls and spilled onto the front steps. Oil lamps cast dancing shadows across faces tight with anticipation. The Washington delegation sat at the front table, their documents arranged with military precision. Mayor Blackwood called for order with a gavel that shook in his sweating palm. The room fell silent, except for the whisper of fabric and the creak of wooden chairs under shifting weight. We're here to address questions regarding Mrs. Washington's legal standing in our community. Reginald Washington rose with the practiced grace of courtroom warfare. His voice carried the authority of old money and older prejudices. Gentlemen, the evidence is clear. Texas law prohibited racial mixing at the time of this alleged marriage. Any union so contracted lacks legal validity. Lawyer Crane opened his satchel and withdrew documents that rustled with false authority. The forged papers bore official seals that caught the lamplight, their lies dressed in legal clothing. Furthermore, we have evidence that Mrs. Washington has been systematically defrauding war widows across the South, using similar false claims to steal inheritances rightfully belonging to white families. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some faces showed satisfaction at seeing the uppity woman brought low. Others registered doubt, remembering kindnesses that spoke louder than legal documents. Dr. Eleanor Hartwell stood in the back of the room, her medical bag clutched tight against her chest. Her voice cut through the rising noise clear as a church bell. I have something to say about the validity of that marriage. The room fell silent. Even the wind outside seemed to pause, waiting for words that would reshape everything they thought they knew. I was present at the wedding of Magnolia Freeman and Colonel Henry Washington, served as official witness. I have the original marriage certificate, signed and sealed according to federal law. She reached into her bag and withdrew a document that glowed with authentic authority. The paper bore none of the fresh creases of forgery. Its ink faded with honest age. More than that, I have evidence that these gentlemen have been using forged documents to cheat legitimate war widows out of their inheritances. Texas Rangers have been tracking their activities for months. Reginald Washington's face flushed crimson as his carefully constructed lies crumbled around him. Crane grabbed for his satchel, but strong hands from the crowd prevented his escape. The moment of truth had arrived for Millbrook's citizens. They could retreat into familiar prejudices or step forward into uncomfortable grace. Jeb McCready stood, his weathered hands steady on Timothy's shoulders. His voice carried across the silent room without tremor or doubt. I've seen what real character looks like. It's not about the color of someone's skin or how much money they inherit. It's about how they treat a scared little boy and his desperate father when they have nothing to offer in return. His words broke the dam of silence. One by one, families rose to speak truth that had been waiting for courage to give it voice. The Irish immigrant whose children Maggie had secretly taught to read. The Mexican vaquero who'd received fair wages when others offered exploitation. Former Confederate soldiers whose pride she'd helped restore through honest work and dignified treatment. Each testimony built upon the last until the room rang with stories of quiet grace and persistent kindness. The conspiracy against Maggie crumbled under the weight of community memory. As voices rose in her defense, labor pains seized Maggie with sudden intensity. Dr. Hartwell pushed through the crowd, her medical training overriding all other concerns. The meeting dissolved into organized chaos as the community that had just defended her rights rallied to protect her life. Timothy held his father's hand while Dr. Hartwell worked with practiced efficiency. Jeb's steady presence anchored the boy through hours that stretched like years. When dawn finally broke across Texas sky, it illuminated a daughter born into a world transformed by her mother's courage. Maggie cradled the tiny life against her chest, exhaustion giving way to fierce protectiveness. The baby's first cries had announced more than new life. They'd proclaimed the victory of love over law, grace over prejudice. "What do you say we make this family official?" Jeb's proposal came wrapped in the quiet certainty of a man who'd found his place in the world. His calloused hand covered Maggie's gentle fingers, wedding rough with smooth and promise of shared tomorrows. Timothy's cheer echoed through the morning air, his joy infectious as spring rain after drought. Can I really be her big brother forever? The wedding took place 6 months later in the shadow of New Hope School, built where Millbrook's auction platform had once stood. The same community that had gathered to buy and sell human dignity now celebrated love that transcended every boundary their world had constructed. Former enemies worked side by side, building desks and painting walls for children who would learn together regardless of the color of their skin or the accent of their speech. The Irish immigrants' children sat beside the Mexican vaqueros' sons and daughters, while former Confederate soldiers taught arithmetic to students whose parents had once been enslaved. Timothy's first school play drew the entire transformed community. His dedication rang clear across the packed schoolhouse. "This is for my Miss Maggie Mama, who taught me that families are made by love, not blood, and that grace can change the world if we're brave enough to let it." The applause lasted until tears replaced sound, until the entire room wept for joy at what they'd become. Outside, the new sign caught evening light. New Hope, Texas, founded on second chances. Maggie sat with her daughter sleeping in her arms while Jeb's hand rested warm on her shoulder. Timothy leaned against her chair, his wooden horse forgotten in favor of a book that painted pictures with words. Around them, the community they'd helped transform celebrated children who played together without seeing differences that had once seemed insurmountable. The auction platform was gone, replaced by a school where every child learned that knowledge was the one thing no one could steal. The locked room in Magnolia Ranch stood open now, its maps and letters serving as reminders of journeys completed and battles won. Love had triumphed over law, grace had conquered prejudice, and in a small Texas town where change came slow as winter thaw, hearts had opened wide enough to hold hope for everyone. The tears that fell were tears of redemption, proof that sometimes the most unexpected acts of kindness can indeed change the world. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.